They said it would take 9 months. Maybe 12. Some people quietly whispered it might never be the same again. Patrick Mahomes, the most important player in the NFL, the guy who redefined what a quarterback could be, went down with a torn ACL. And the football world held its breath. But here's the thing nobody saw coming. He's back. Early. And he looks terrifying. Not just good. Not just recovered. We're talking about a version of Patrick Mahomes that has spent every single day of his recovery not just healing his knee, but upgrading everything else. His arm. His mind. His preparation. His obsession. While the rest of the NFL thought they finally had a window, a gap, a chance to breathe without Patrick Mahomes hunting them down, he was in the dark, in the gym, in the film room, building something. And now the window is closed. The NFL is not ready for what is coming. And by the end of this video, you will completely understand why. Let's go. Picture this. It's a regular season game. Nothing too flashy about the moment on paper. Patrick Mahomes drops back, feels pressure, plants his foot to scramble, and then it happens. That sound. That horrible, unmistakable moment where an athlete's body betrays them in real time. He goes down. The stadium goes quiet in that way stadiums only go quiet when something serious has happened. Players from both teams take a knee. Cameras zoom in on his face, and what you see there isn't just pain, it's disbelief. Because Patrick Mahomes has never been the guy who gets hurt like that. He's the guy who escapes, who spins, who somehow turns nothing into a touchdown. He's not supposed to be the one on the ground. But there he was. And the football world was immediately divided into 2 camps. The first camp, the Chiefs' kingdom, was devastated. Numb. Already calculating what this meant for the season, for the dynasty, for everything they had built. The second camp, every other fan in the NFL, was doing something they hadn't been able to do in years. They were exhaling. They were daring to dream. Because if Patrick Mahomes was out, the door was open. The throne was suddenly empty. And everyone wanted to walk through that door. Here's what they didn't count on. Patrick Mahomes doesn't just heal. He evolves. To really understand what makes this comeback so remarkable, you have to understand what ACL surgery actually means for an athlete. Not in the clinical sense, forget the medical terms for a second. Here's what it actually means in human terms. Your knee is basically the engine of everything you do as an athlete. Every cut, every sprint, every pivot, every explosive movement starts there. The ACL, the anterior cruciate ligament, is one of the most important stabilizers in that engine. And when it tears, it doesn't just hurt. It rewires your entire relationship with your body. Athletes who've gone through it describe a terrifying moment that happens long after the physical healing is done. It's called the fear. That moment when you go to make a sharp cut or plant and drive, and somewhere deep in your brain, your body hesitates. Just for a fraction of a second. But in the NFL, a fraction of a second is the difference between a completion and a pick six. Between a scramble and a sack. Between winning and losing. The best quarterbacks who came back from ACL tears, and there aren't many, because most quarterbacks in Mahomes' position were older or never quite the same, had to completely retrain their brains. Had to go through hundreds and hundreds of repetitions just to convince their nervous system that the knee was okay, that it was safe to trust it again. Most athletes need a full year just to feel normal again. Some never do. Patrick Mahomes is apparently not most athletes. Because the timeline of his recovery has been, by every account from people inside the Chiefs organization and around the league, ahead of schedule. Way ahead. And what's more chilling than the speed of his recovery is the way he's been described by people who've seen him work. Not like a player coming back from an injury. Like a player who used the injury as an excuse to become something different. Something more. Think about what Mahomes was already doing before the injury. Let's just sit with this for a second, because sometimes we forget how absurd his resume is. Multiple Super Bowl victories. Multiple Super Bowl MVP awards. Multiple league MVP awards. He's already one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, and he's still in the prime of his career. He has a weapon at tight end in Travis Kelce that defenses have literally constructed entire defensive philosophies to try to stop. He has a coaching staff around him that has proven over and over again that they can adapt, scheme around anything, and find ways to win in moments when no one else can. And all of that was already in place before the injury. Now add this, a Patrick Mahomes who spent months with nothing to do but think, study, watch film, analyze defenses, fix the tiny inefficiencies in his game that most quarterbacks would never even notice because they're too busy playing. While other quarterbacks were out there making mistakes, taking hits, developing bad habits under pressure, Mahomes was in a lab, working on his mechanics, watching every snap of every defense he's going to face this season, studying tendencies, alignments, coverage, blitz packages. He didn't waste a single day of that recovery. And here's what that means. When you combine his already elite football IQ with months of uninterrupted study and refinement, you get a quarterback who is mentally sharper now than he was before the injury. His knee will heal. His knee is healing, reportedly faster than expected. But the mental gains, those are already locked in. Those don't go away. The NFL is preparing to face a Patrick Mahomes who knows them better than they know themselves. Let's talk about what the rest of the league did while he was gone. Because this is where the story gets really interesting, and a little bit painful for the teams that thought they had their opening. In every competitive ecosystem, when the dominant force temporarily steps back, what tends to happen is a mad scramble. Everyone rushes to fill the void. Teams that were previously resigned to their second-place status suddenly start believing. Coaches who were content to play for wild card spots start dreaming about conference championships. Front offices that were quietly rebuilding start making aggressive moves. And that's exactly what happened across the AFC while Mahomes was working through his rehab. Teams made moves. Teams talked bold. Teams started framing their narratives around a new era dawning. The idea, sometimes spoken out loud, sometimes just hanging in the air, was that the window was finally open. That the Chiefs were vulnerable. That this was the moment. But here's the brutal reality of competitive dynamics at the highest level, and this applies to sports, to business, to anything. When you're only improving because the best person in the room is temporarily gone, you're not actually closing the gap. You're just running in place while the gap briefly appears smaller. The moment they come back, you find out exactly how much you've really grown. The NFL is about to find that out. Because the Chiefs didn't stand still while Mahomes was healing. They didn't go into crisis mode. They didn't panic. They did what well-run organizations do. They adapted, they evaluated, they prepared. Andy Reid, one of the greatest offensive minds in football history, used this time to stress test his system. To figure out exactly what worked without Mahomes and what didn't. To identify which pieces of the offense were truly elite and which ones had been propped up by the transcendent talent at quarterback. That kind of information is invaluable. Because now, when Mahomes comes back, Reid doesn't just have his best player healthy again. He has a detailed map of exactly where the vulnerabilities were, and exactly how to fix them. You thought the Chiefs were dangerous before. They just spent an entire painful stretch of games doing a deep diagnostic on themselves. Now they know where every crack in the armor was. And they've been patching every single one. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough in the conversation about Mahomes' comeback, the psychological dimension. There is a specific kind of fire that gets lit in elite competitors when they face something that genuinely threatens to take away what they love. It's different from regular motivation. It's different from the standard pre-game intensity. It's something deeper, something almost primal. You see it in athletes who come back from career-threatening injuries and suddenly play with a desperation and a hunger that they never quite had before, not because they weren't motivated before, but because they never truly understood what it felt like to almost lose it. Michael Jordan after his baseball hiatus. Peyton Manning after his neck surgery. Tiger Woods after his back surgeries. There's a pattern here, elite athletes who face genuine adversity, who come close to the edge of losing everything, and then come back with something burning in their eyes that was never quite there before. Patrick Mahomes has now joined that company. He knows what it feels like to watch games from the sideline. He knows what it feels like to watch other quarterbacks get the spotlight, to watch the league move on, even temporarily, without him. He knows what it feels like to be uncertain, to wonder, even for a brief dark moment in the middle of rehab, whether the knee will ever be fully right again. That experience doesn't weaken elite athletes. It weaponizes them. The version of Patrick Mahomes that comes back from this ACL injury will be the most motivated version of Patrick Mahomes that has ever stepped onto a football field. And the most motivated version of Patrick Mahomes is, historically, an absolutely terrifying thing to face. Let's talk about the physical recovery itself, because the details here are genuinely remarkable and they tell you a lot about how this comeback is going to go. ACL recovery in modern sports medicine has come a long way. The 9 to 12 month timeline that used to be standard has been compressed, for elite athletes with the best medical teams and the most disciplined rehabilitation protocols, down to 6 to 8 months in some cases. The Chiefs organization has access to some of the best sports medicine and rehabilitation resources in professional football. Mahomes himself has the resources, the discipline, and the physical gifts to maximize every aspect of his recovery. But what's been notable, what people inside the organization have quietly let slip, is that it's not just the timeline of his recovery that's been impressive. It's the quality. His explosiveness. The way he's moving. The way he's throwing. There are quarterbacks who come back from ACL injuries technically within the expected timeline but who clearly don't have their full burst back yet. Their drops look slightly hesitant. Their pocket movement is a little more cautious. Their improvisation, the ability to feel pressure and explode out of the pocket, is dialed back by some invisible percentage. None of that has been reported about Mahomes. What has been reported, in careful, measured terms by people who understand they're speaking about something extraordinary, is that he looks like himself. Not like a diminished version of himself running at 90%. Not like a quarterback managing an injury. Like Patrick Mahomes. And if Patrick Mahomes at 100% is back, physically, mentally, emotionally, then the NFL's worst nightmare is not returning. The NFL's worst nightmare is arriving for the first time, because this version has been through fire and came back harder. Now let's talk about the opposition. Because the case for the NFL being unprepared isn't just about Mahomes, it's also about the very real limitations of the teams that were supposed to challenge him. Look around the AFC right now. Who was going to be the team to dethrone the Chiefs in a world where Mahomes was healthy? Let's be real about this. The answer, uncomfortably for everyone outside Kansas City, is, there's no clear answer. There are good teams. There are talented quarterbacks. There are interesting offensive systems and smart coaching staffs. But none of them have a player who does what Mahomes does. None of them have a weapon like Kelce in his prime. None of them have an organizational culture that has been forged in the heat of multiple Super Bowl runs, that knows exactly what it takes to win in January, that has been through those moments before and knows how to stay calm when everything is on the line. The gap was already significant before the injury. The injury closed it slightly, temporarily, because even the greatest quarterback can't play on a torn ACL. But that gap was always an illusion of circumstance, not a reflection of actual roster and organizational quality. And now the circumstance is changing. Mahomes is back. The gap is reopening. And the teams that were celebrating, quietly, carefully, trying not to jinx themselves, are about to find out that they never actually caught up. They were just enjoying the brief moment of silence before the storm came back. Let's slow down for a second and zoom in on something specific. Because one of the most interesting aspects of this whole story is what it tells us about the nature of greatness under pressure. There's a concept in elite competition, coaches talk about it, sports psychologists write about it, called adversity as accelerant. The basic idea is this: for most people, adversity slows things down. It knocks them off their path, forces them to recover, and by the time they get back to where they were, they've lost time and ground. But for a very specific category of elite performers, adversity works differently. It doesn't slow them down. It accelerates them. It forces adaptations, mental and physical, that wouldn't have happened any other way. It burns away the unnecessary things and leaves only the essential core, refined, hardened, more pure than before. Patrick Mahomes is the clearest possible example of adversity as accelerant. Think about every moment in his career where something went wrong and he came back stronger. The playoff games where he was down by double digits and orchestrated comeback after comeback. The Super Bowls where defenses threw everything they had at him and he found a way through. The games where his weapons were limited, where receivers were injured, where the offensive line was struggling, and he still found a way to win because his individual excellence was simply too much to contain. Every time the pressure went up, Mahomes went up with it. An ACL injury is the ultimate version of that test. And based on everything being reported, he is passing it in the most Patrick Mahomes way possible, which is to say, he's not just recovering. He's ascending. Here's a curiosity loop for you. A question that I want you to hold in your mind as we keep going. If Patrick Mahomes comes back this season at full strength, with a chip on his shoulder, with months of film study locked in his brain, with a coaching staff that has just spent an entire stretch of games identifying and fixing every vulnerability in their system, what specific defensive scheme stops him? I want you to actually think about that. Not as a rhetorical question. As a genuine strategic puzzle. Man coverage. Mahomes picks it apart with his ability to go through progressions faster than almost any quarterback in NFL history. His short to intermediate game is so precise and his receivers run routes with such crisp timing that man coverage gets beaten before the coverage has time to rotate. Zone coverage. He's been reading zones since college. He holds safeties with his eyes, manipulates coverage rotations with pump fakes and his gaze, and then exploits the exact window that the zone leaves open. He's been doing this since before he was famous. He does it in his sleep now. Heavy pressure. Blitzing Patrick Mahomes has historically been a losing strategy because he processes information so quickly that by the time the blitzer gets there, the ball is already gone. And on the rare occasions when he does have to extend a play, he does it with the kind of off-platform, off-balance, impossible throwing ability that defensive coordinators have nightmares about. Take away kelce. Everyone has tried this. Multiple defenders, specific coverage assignments, varying alignments, and kelce still produces, still finds windows, still makes the catches that matter in the fourth quarter. You cannot take him out of the game. But more importantly, when teams commit extra resources to kelce, the other playmakers on the offense feast. So again, what stops him? The honest answer is, nothing has reliably stopped him. And the slightly terrifying follow-up to that answer is, the version coming back may be harder to stop than the one that went down with the injury. Let's talk about the legacy dimension of this comeback, because it matters and it's something that's genuinely going to shape the narrative of the entire NFL season. Patrick Mahomes is already playing for history. He is already in the conversation for greatest quarterback of all time, not just his era, but all time. The records he's going to set, the championships he has a real chance to win, the efficiency numbers he's posting, it's all pointing toward a legacy that will be discussed for as long as football is played. And now he has a story within the story. The comeback from a torn ACL is one of the most powerful narratives in professional sports. There's something in the human psyche that responds to the image of a great athlete going down, refusing to stay down, and rising back to reclaim their place at the top. We've seen it with other great players, in other sports, in other eras. It becomes part of the mythology. It becomes the chapter in the biography that young athletes read and feel something stir in their chest. Mahomes coming back from this injury, especially if he comes back and immediately picks up where he left off, or God help the rest of the league, comes back and performs even better, doesn't just add to his resume. It adds to his legend. It transforms him from a great quarterback into something more like a figure out of sports mythology. The kind of player that future generations will use as the measuring stick for everyone who comes after. And here's the thing about athletes who are consciously aware of their legacy, and Patrick Mahomes absolutely is, they don't let moments like this go to waste. They understand, maybe better than anyone, that the comeback is a chapter that has to be written perfectly. That the performance on the field in the weeks and months after the return has to match the magnitude of the story. Patrick Mahomes will not stumble out of this comeback. He will not ease back into things. He will not take games off while he finds his rhythm. He will come back and immediately remind the NFL exactly who he is, because anything less would not fit the story he is writing. And he knows it. Let's talk about Andy Reid for a minute. Because in any conversation about Patrick Mahomes, the role of his head coach deserves its own spotlight. Andy Reid is, by general consensus, one of the 2 or 3 best offensive minds in the history of the NFL. His career spans decades, his systems have produced Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and his ability to adapt his offense to the strengths of his players while disguising that offense from defenses is essentially unmatched in the modern game. He is the architect of the infrastructure around Mahomes, and the infrastructure is as important as the talent it protects. Here's what Reid did during the stretch when Mahomes was injured that almost nobody is talking about. He audited everything. He took this forced reset, painful as it was in terms of results, and turned it into a comprehensive review of every system, every process, every personnel grouping, every scheme within the offense. He found out, in real game conditions, which parts of the offense could function without Mahomes' specific gifts and which parts completely collapsed without him. And that information is enormously valuable. Because now Reid can build a version of the offense that is maximally optimized for Mahomes. He knows exactly which elements are quarterback dependent and which ones are system generated. He can design specific packages that put Mahomes in positions where his unique gifts are not just utilized but amplified. He can create matchups and situations that no other quarterback could execute but that Mahomes executes as naturally as breathing. And the defense. Coordinators around the league have spent the last several months preparing game plans for the version of the Chiefs' offense that was operating without Mahomes. They have poured hours into understanding how to defend that version. And now, when Mahomes walks back onto that field, those game plans become partially obsolete overnight. The adjustments those coordinators will have to make, in real time, in season, with limited practice time and preparation windows, are going to be enormous. The Chiefs are returning a player who changes the calculus for every single team on their schedule. And those teams have limited time to update their plans. We need to talk about Travis Kelce in the context of this comeback. Because whatever you think of the Travis Kelce off-field phenomenon, the cultural fame, the celebrity relationship, the podcast, the Taylor Swift connection, on the football field, he remains one of the most dangerous weapons in the history of the position. And here's the thing about Kelce and Mahomes together, they are not just two good players on the same team. They are a combinatorial weapon that is greater than the sum of its parts. There's a reason defenses refer to the Kelce-Mahomes connection the way they do. It's not just about individual talent. It's about the specific, deeply ingrained communication and timing between these two players that has been built over years and hundreds of hours of practice, film study, and game experience. When you separate them, when Mahomes is gone and Kelce has to work with a different quarterback, something is lost. Not because Kelce suddenly becomes a bad player. Obviously, he doesn't. But the absolute precision of the connection, the ability to read each other's reactions and adjust in real time in ways that no one watching can even fully decode, that goes away. That requires Mahomes specifically. Now they're together again. And after a separation, after the experience of working apart and being reminded exactly why they are what they are when they're together, athletes often come back to their partnerships with a renewed intensity and appreciation. The hunger to reconnect, to rediscover what they build together, is real. It's documented in sports psychology. It's been observed in great athletic partnerships that were temporarily disrupted and then reunited. Kelce and Mahomes are coming back together after a forced separation. Both of them hungry. Both of them with something to prove. Both of them fully aware of the stakes of this season. That should terrify every defensive coordinator in the NFL. Let me paint you a picture. This is a hypothetical. But it's a hypothetical that is, based on everything we know, more likely than not. It's September. Opening week of the season. Patrick Mahomes trots onto the field for the first time since the injury. Arrowhead Stadium is at a level of volume that tests the structural limits of the building. 75,000 people on their feet before the first snap. Opposing defense trying not to let the moment affect them. Trying to stay locked in on their assignments and not get swept up in the narrative. First drive. Mahomes comes out and immediately shows the defense something they haven't seen before, a new wrinkle in the offense that Reid installed during the offseason. Something designed specifically to exploit the tendencies that defense has shown in their preparation for the post-injury Chiefs. Something they haven't had time to fully prepare for. Touchdown. And in that moment, across the entire NFL, in film rooms and coaches' offices and training facilities in every city that has a professional football team, everyone takes a breath and thinks the same thought. He's back. He's really back. And we are not ready for this. Here's where the story gets even more compelling, and I want you to stay with me here because this is the part that really separates the Patrick Mahomes story from just a standard comeback narrative. Most athletes who come back from major injuries are focused on getting back to where they were. That's the goal. That's the bar they're trying to clear. Get back to the pre-injury version of themselves. Recapture what was lost. Patrick Mahomes appears to have set a different bar. From everything that people around the organization have said, carefully, in the measured language of professional sports where you don't want to hype things too much and create expectations that could backfire, the impression is not of a player trying to get back to where he was. The impression is of a player trying to become something he wasn't before. Using the injury, the rehab, the time away from the game as an opportunity not just to heal but to evolve. The throwing mechanics. The footwork. The speed of his decision-making process. The depth of his pre-snap reads. All of these things have been worked on in ways that weren't possible during a regular season because there just isn't time. The NFL season grinds through from September to January with almost no real downtime for refinement. You're always preparing for the next opponent, recovering from the last game, managing your body through the physical toll of the schedule. The injury gave Mahomes something almost no player at the peak of their career ever gets: time. Real, uninterrupted time to go back to the fundamentals. To look at every aspect of his game with fresh eyes. To fix things that had become habits, not necessarily bad habits, but improvised solutions to problems that were actually solvable more efficiently. To work on the stuff that only matters in the rare moments of a playoff game when everything is on the line and perfection is the only acceptable standard. He had months of time. And he used every second of it. Now I want to bring in a broader perspective, because the story of Patrick Mahomes coming back from this injury is not just a football story. It's a story about what elite performance actually looks like up close. We live in a culture that obsesses over the finish line. The result. The outcome. The highlight. We watch the touchdown and we celebrate the touchdown and we share the clip of the touchdown, and we forget, almost immediately, the thousands of hours of preparation that made that touchdown possible. We forget the 5 a.m. mornings. We forget the ice baths. We forget the film sessions that run so late that the stadium is dark and quiet and the only sound is the hum of the projector. We forget the conversations with coaches, the adjustments between series, the mental representatives run in the shower and in the car and in the moments before sleep. We forget all of that because it's not on the highlight reel. It doesn't look glamorous. It doesn't get clipped and shared. But the injury forces all of that into the foreground. Because suddenly the highlight reel is gone, there are no touchdowns to watch, no plays to celebrate. And what's left is just the work. Just the grind of rehabilitation. Just the daily, painful, incremental progress towards something that might or might not be fully restored. And what we're learning, what the Patrick Mahomes comeback is showing us, is that when you strip away the games and the highlights and the results and you just watch what a person does when the spotlight is off and the outcome is uncertain and the work is hard and unglamorous and endless, that's when you find out who someone really is. Patrick Mahomes, stripped of everything except the work, chose to become better. That tells you everything. Let's zoom back out to the macro picture. The NFL landscape. What does it actually look like when Mahomes returns? The AFC is going to reorganize itself around his presence the moment he steps back on the field. Teams that were carefully building their identities around being the dominant force in the conference in a Mahomes-absent world are going to have to confront the reality that the world is no longer Mahomes-absent. Everything recalibrates. Everything adjusts. Some teams will handle that recalibration well. They've built something real, something with genuine depth and talent, and they'll recognize that they still have a path to the Super Bowl even in a world where Mahomes is healthy. They'll adjust their expectations appropriately and compete hard. Other teams won't handle it as well. Teams that were running on narrative momentum, on the story of themselves as the new dominant force in the conference, are going to find that narrative colliding with a very different reality. And when the results on the field start to diverge from the story they'd been telling, there are going to be some very difficult conversations in some front offices and coaching rooms. The NFL is about to go through a recalibration. And the catalyst for that recalibration is the return of the player who was already, before the injury, before the comeback, before any of this, the best player in the sport. I want to stay with the emotional dimension here for a moment, because I think it matters and I think it's often overlooked in sports analysis, which tends to focus on the measurable and the tactical. There are people in Kansas City, real people, fans, not sports personalities or analysts, who had a legitimately emotional response to this injury. Who felt genuine grief when Mahomes went down. Who felt a kind of helplessness watching the team try to navigate without him. Who spent weeks and months wondering and worrying and hoping and praying that the knee would be okay, that the recovery would work, that they'd get their guy back. Sports fandom is a strange thing. We attach ourselves to these players and these teams in ways that can seem disproportionate from the outside. But that attachment is real. The hope is real. The heartbreak is real. And the joy of a comeback, of watching someone you've invested your emotions in overcome something significant and return to greatness, that joy is real too. When Mahomes takes that first snap in his return, whenever that moment comes, there are going to be people in that stadium who have carried this worry for months. Who have checked the injury reports every week. Who have kept track of every update about his recovery timeline. Who have prayed for this moment. And when he drops back and throws a perfect spiral to a receiver who's wide open because the defense was so worried about Kelce, and when that ball lands in those hands and the completion is made and the crowd erupts, in that moment, all of that accumulated worry and hope and faith will transform into something pure. That's what sports can do. That's the magic of it. And Mahomes, when he's healthy and in full flight, produces those moments more reliably than almost any athlete playing today. Let's talk about what the rest of the season looks like. Because the timeline here is important and it shapes the stakes in a really compelling way. The NFL season is essentially 2 seasons in one. There's the regular season, 16 games spread across 17 weeks, where teams are accumulating wins and losses and positioning themselves in the standings, and then there's the playoff season, where the accumulated record and seeding determines the path to the Super Bowl. And these 2 seasons require very different things from a quarterback. In the regular season, you can manage. You can be patient. You can take your time getting back to full rhythm and full explosiveness. The margin for error is slightly larger. The games matter, but not every game is a must-win. In the playoff season, there is no margin. Every game is elimination. Every error is potentially fatal. Every moment of hesitation, every imprecision, every physical limitation gets exposed under the microscope of playoff football. What this means for Mahomes' return is this: the regular season is going to serve as his extended shakeout period. His opportunity to get his timing back with Kelce, to recalibrate his footwork and mechanics under game conditions, to rebuild the specific football instincts that can only truly be sharpened by playing actual NFL games against real NFL defenses. And then, when January comes and the games become everything, when the lights are brightest and the pressure is most extreme, he will be ready. Fully ready. The regular season will have done its job. The shakeout will be complete. And in January, a fully ready Patrick Mahomes on a mission, coming off an ACL injury, playing for his legacy, that is the most dangerous thing in professional football. One more thing I want to address before we start bringing this home. And it's something that the skeptics will bring up, because there are always skeptics, and in this case the skeptics have at least one valid point to make. The valid point is this: ACL injuries do sometimes leave a permanent mark, even on the most elite athletes. There are quarterbacks, some of them very good quarterbacks, who tore their ACL and came back, and while they were still functional and competitive, the very best version of what they were was slightly out of reach. The explosiveness coming out of the pocket. The ability to improvise under pressure. The confidence to trust the knee in those high-leverage moments when the body needs to move without thinking. It's a real concern. Nobody should dismiss it completely. But here's why: in the specific case of Patrick Mahomes, this concern is significantly less relevant than it would be for most quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes is not primarily an athletically dominant quarterback. He's not a guy whose entire game is built on running and escaping and making plays with his legs. His greatest gifts are mental: the processing speed, the ability to read coverage, the football IQ, the ability to manipulate defenders with his eyes and his shoulders and his pump fakes. The throwing ability across his entire arm talent spectrum, from darts to touch throws to the absolutely insane off-platform stuff that shouldn't be possible. None of those things go away with an ACL injury. The athleticism is a bonus with Mahomes. A weapon, yes. An important part of his game, absolutely. But the core of what makes him elite is not in his legs. It's in his brain. And his brain didn't get injured. So while other quarterbacks whose entire game identity is built on athleticism, might be meaningfully diminished by an ACL tear, Mahomes has an ability to compensate, to adapt, to be brilliant in ways that don't require full explosiveness that most quarterbacks simply do not have. Even if there is some residual limitation from the injury, and early reports suggest there isn't, but even if there were, the foundation of his greatness remains completely intact. We're getting close to the end here, but I want to leave you with one final image. One final frame to carry with you as you think about what's coming. Imagine it's late January. Playoff football. The Chiefs are in the conference championship game, one win away from the Super Bowl. The opposing defense has been preparing for this game for 2 weeks. They've watched hundreds of hours of film. They've installed specific coverage, specific blitz packages, specific personnel groupings designed to take away what Mahomes does best. The stadium is at maximum volume. Every play matters. Every down is the difference between advancing and going home. And Patrick Mahomes looks across the line of scrimmage at that defense that has spent 2 weeks preparing for him, that knows his tendencies, that has accounted for his weapons, that has a plan. And he makes them pay for every assumption they made. Because that's what Patrick Mahomes does. He has always done it. He will always do it. And the specific version of him that comes back from this ACL injury, hungrier, sharper, more studied, more determined than any version before, is going to do it at a level that we might not have seen before. The NFL thought it had a window. The window is closing. Patrick Mahomes is back. And the game of football will never look quite the same on the other side of what's coming. You just watched the full breakdown of why Patrick Mahomes' ACL comeback might be the most dangerous development in the NFL right now. If this video made you see the situation differently, if you felt even one moment where something clicked, where the story landed, where the stakes became real for you, then this is worth sharing. Because there are football fans out there who still think the league has time to prepare for this. They don't. And now you know exactly why.